I was checking my cattle one morning when I heard the rumble of heavy machinery coming from the back of my property. When I rode out to investigate, I found a construction crew building a paved road straight through the middle of my ranch without my permission. And when I confronted them, they handed me a letter saying I was legally required to allow it. That's when I realized I was dealing with the most audacious land grab I'd ever seen, and it was about to become the most expensive mistake the Sunset Hills HOA ever made. Let me tell you how a simple property dispute turned into a $1 million lawsuit that exposed corruption, destroyed careers, and taught an entire community that you don't mess with a rancher who knows his rights. My name is Jake Morrison, and I've been running the Double M Ranch outside Austin, Texas for 12 years. I inherited this 400-acre spread from my grandfather, who bought it back in 1967 when land was cheap and neighbors minded their own business. The ranch isn't fancy, but it's profitable. I run 200 head of cattle, grow hay for local farms, and lease hunting rights during deer season. It's honest work that pays the bills and lets me live the way I want to live, which is pretty much left alone. That peaceful existence ended on a Tuesday morning in September when I woke up to the sound of bulldozers on my property. I saddled up my horse Rex and rode out toward the noise, thinking maybe one of my neighbors was doing some construction and the sound was carrying farther than usual. What I found instead was a full construction crew with excavators, graders, and cement trucks building what looked like a residential street right through my best grazing pasture. I rode up to the work site and found the foreman, a sweaty guy in a hard hat who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Excuse me," I called out over the machinery noise. "This is private property. What's going on here?" He pulled out a folder and handed me an official-looking document. "Road Construction Permit 47B," he said. "Community Access Road. All legal and approved." I scanned the paperwork, which was full of legal language and official stamps, but one thing was crystal clear. It showed my property being bisected by a new road that would connect the Sunset Hills subdivision to the main highway. "There's got to be some mistake," I said. "This is my ranch. I never gave permission for any road." The foreman shrugged. "Take it up with the HOA. I just build what they pay me to build." That's when I noticed the survey stakes running in a perfect line from the Sunset Hills development, across my ranch and out to Highway 71. Someone had planned this road down to the inch, and they'd done it without talking to me once. I rode back to the house with my mind racing and my blood pressure rising. Someone was trying to steal a strip of my land, and they were doing it with official paperwork and construction crews like it was completely legal. The first thing I did was call my lawyer, Bill Henderson, who'd been handling my family's legal affairs for 20 years. Bill had the kind of calm, steady voice that usually made problems seem smaller, but when I described what was happening on my ranch, I could hear him getting as angry as I was. "Jake, they can't just build a road through private property without an easement or eminent domain," he said. "Send me photos of everything, the construction, the paperwork, the survey stakes. I'll start making calls." While Bill worked the legal angle, I started doing my own investigation. I drove over to Sunset Hills, a development that had been built 5 years ago when Austin's growth started spreading out into the countryside. It was one of those cookie-cutter subdivisions with houses that all looked the same and yards you could mow with a pair of scissors. I found the HOA office in a strip mall and walked in to talk to whoever was in charge. The receptionist, a woman with too much makeup and an attitude that suggested she dealt with complainers all day, looked at me like I was tracking mud on her carpet. "I'm here about the road being built through my ranch," I said as politely as I could manage. "You'll need to speak with Mr. Richardson," she said without looking up from her computer. "He's our community development coordinator." 5 minutes later, I was sitting across from David Richardson, a thin man in an expensive suit who had the kind of smile that politicians use when they're about to lie to you. "Mr. Morrison," he said, reviewing a file that apparently contained information about me and my property. "I understand you have concerns about our community improvement project." "Community improvement?" I said. "You're building a road through the middle of my ranch without permission." Richardson's smile never wavered. "Actually, we have all the necessary permits and legal authority. The road is being built under the Community Connectivity Act, which allows HOAs to create essential infrastructure for public benefit." I'd never heard of the Community Connectivity Act, but Richardson was talking about it like it was common knowledge. "Let me see the documentation," I said. He handed me a thick folder full of legal documents, environmental impact studies, and what looked like approval letters from various government agencies. It was impressive in its thoroughness and completely overwhelming in its complexity. "As you can see," Richardson continued, "this project has been in development for over 2 years. All proper procedures have been followed." I looked through the paperwork trying to find something that made sense. Most of it was legal jargon that might as well have been written in Latin, but one document caught my attention, a property survey that showed my ranch with a 50-foot wide public access corridor running right through the middle of it. "This survey shows my property with a public access corridor," I said. "When was this survey done?" "Last month," Richardson replied. "Professional survey company, fully licensed and bonded." "Who hired them?" "The HOA, as part of our due diligence process." That's when I realized what was happening. These people hadn't made a mistake or misunderstood some property boundary. They had deliberately planned to take a strip of my land, and they'd created a paper trail to make it look legal. "Mr. Richardson," I said, standing up and gathering the paperwork, "I'm going to have my lawyer review all of this. In the meantime, I want construction stopped on my property." His smile finally faded. "I'm afraid that's not possible, Mr. Morrison. We have legal authority to proceed, and stopping construction at this point would cost the community thousands of dollars in delays." "Then you should have talked to me before you started. We sent notification letters to all affected property owners," he said, pulling out another document. "You should have received this certified letter 30 days ago." I looked at the receipt he handed me. It showed a certified letter sent to Jake Morrison, 1247 County Road 45, Austin, Texas. My address was 1274 County Road 45. Someone had deliberately sent legal notification to the wrong address. "This isn't my address," I said. Richardson looked at the paper with feigned surprise. "Oh my, it appears there was a clerical error. But the intent to notify was clearly demonstrated." That's when I knew I was dealing with professionals. These people had planned everything down to the accidental wrong address that would give them legal cover for not properly notifying me. I left the HOA office with a folder full of suspicious documents and a clear understanding that I was up against people who had more money and better lawyers than I did. But what they didn't know was that 12 years of ranching had taught me patience, persistence, and how to fight for what's mine. Bill Henderson reviewed their paperwork and came back with news that was both good and bad. "Jake, the good news is that most of these documents are either forged or based on laws that don't actually exist," he said during our meeting the next day. "The Community Connectivity Act they keep citing? There's no such law in Texas." "What's the bad news?" "The bad news is that they've spent a lot of money creating very convincing fake documentation. This isn't some amateur scam, they've got professional forgers and lawyers involved." Bill explained that the HOA strategy seemed to be based on the assumption that most property owners wouldn't have the resources to fight a legal battle, and would eventually give in rather than face years of court costs. "They're counting on you being too small to fight back," he said. "What they don't realize is that you've got something they don't. You're actually in the right." We filed an emergency injunction to stop construction, but the HOA's lawyers argued that halting the project would cause irreparable harm to the community and that my claims were frivolous. The judge, unfortunately, seemed impressed by their stack of official-looking paperwork and denied our request. Construction continued while we prepared for a longer legal fight. Every morning, I would ride out to check on the construction progress and document what they were doing to my property. They'd torn up about 5 acres of good pasture land and were steadily working their way toward the highway. The road they were building wasn't some simple dirt track. It was a full 2-lane paved road with drainage culverts and even street lights. This wasn't just about convenient access to their subdivision. They were building infrastructure that would significantly increase their property values by providing direct highway access, and they were doing it by stealing my land. While Bill worked on building our legal case, I started doing my own research into the Sunset Hills HOA and David Richardson. What I found was a pattern of aggressive expansion tactics that had been going on for years. Richardson wasn't just the community development coordinator, he was also a part owner of the construction company building the road, the survey company that had done the professional survey, and the legal firm representing the HOA. He was essentially paying himself with HOA funds to steal land from neighboring property owners. I also discovered that my ranch wasn't their first target. Over the past 3 years, they'd acquired easements, water rights, and small parcels of land from 6 different property owners using similar tactics. Most had eventually settled out of court rather than face prolonged legal battles. But I found one case that was different. A woman named Martha Rodriguez had fought them for 18 months over water rights to a creek that ran through her property. She'd eventually won, but only after spending $50,000 in legal fees and discovering that the HOA had forged documents from the State Water Commission. I called Martha and asked if she'd be willing to share her experience. "Those people are criminals," she told me during our phone conversation. "Richardson and his crew have turned that HOA into a land-grabbing operation. They target properties around their development and use fake legal documents to take what they want. Martha had kept copies of all the forged documents from her case, and when she sent them to me, I could see the same pattern: official-looking paperwork that fell apart under close examination, fake addresses for legal notifications, and laws that didn't exist. The problem, Martha explained, is that most people don't have the money or time to fight them. They eventually give up and accept whatever settlement is offered. What made you keep fighting? Principle, she said. And the fact that my late husband had made me promise never to let anyone steal our land. Martha's story gave me hope, but it also showed me how expensive and time-consuming this fight was going to be. The HOA had deep pockets and professional criminals working for them. I had a good lawyer and righteous anger, but that might not be enough. That's when I decided to get creative. If the HOA wanted to play dirty, I could play dirty too. But instead of forging documents or bribing officials, I decided to use the one weapon they couldn't defend against: public attention. I started by creating a Facebook page called Save the Double M Ranch, and posting daily updates about the construction happening on my property. I included photos of the bulldozers, copies of the fake legal documents, and explanations of how the HOA was trying to steal private land. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within a week, I had over 500 followers, most of them local ranchers and property owners who were furious about what was happening. Many shared their own stories about HOA overreach and property rights violations. Local news stations started picking up the story after one of my posts went viral. Channel 8 sent a reporter out to interview me, and the resulting story about HOA land grab got more attention than anyone expected. This isn't just about my ranch, I told the reporter while standing next to the construction site. This is about whether private property rights mean anything anymore, or if HOAs can just take whatever they want by creating fake paperwork. The story aired on the evening news and was shared thousands of times on social media. Suddenly, Sunset Hills HOA was getting the kind of attention they definitely didn't want. David Richardson agreed to an interview, but it didn't go well for him. When the reporter asked about the Community Connectivity Act, Richardson claimed it was a little-known state statute that applies to essential infrastructure projects. The reporter had done her homework. Mr. Richardson, we contacted the Texas Legislature's Legal Research Department, and they have no record of any Community Connectivity Act. Can you provide documentation? Richardson's response was a masterclass in political double-talk. The statute may be filed under a different name or administrative code. I'll have our legal team provide the specific citation. Of course, he never did provide that citation because the law didn't exist. The media attention had an unexpected benefit. It brought other victims out of the woodwork. I started getting calls and emails from property owners throughout Central Texas who had dealt with similar schemes from various HOAs. Most importantly, I heard from a former employee of Richardson's surveying company who was willing to talk about what he'd witnessed. Tom Bradley had worked as a surveyor for Richardson Survey Solutions for 8 months before quitting in disgust. He contacted me after seeing the news story and offered to provide evidence of systematic fraud. Richardson would send us out to survey properties without the owner's permission, Tom told me during our meeting at a coffee shop in Austin. He'd tell us to classify private land as potential public access corridors or community benefit zones. It was completely made up. Tom had kept copies of survey reports that showed the same pattern I'd seen on my ranch, professional-looking documents that reclassified private property to benefit HOA projects. The worst part, Tom continued, was when he'd have us backdate surveys to make it look like the legal process had been going on for years. He had templates for fake government approval letters and a whole system for creating fraudulent documentation. Tom's evidence was exactly what Bill Henderson needed to build a criminal case against Richardson and the HOA. But Tom was nervous about testifying. These people have a lot of money and good lawyers, he said. I'm just a surveyor trying to make a living. I understood his concern, but I also knew that without his testimony, Richardson would probably get away with stealing land from property owners who couldn't afford to fight back. Tom, I said, if we don't stop them now, they're going to keep doing this to other people. How many ranchers and homeowners are going to lose their property because we were afraid to speak up? Tom agreed to testify, but only if we could guarantee his safety and provide legal protection from retaliation. Bill Henderson had been building our case for 2 months when he called with news that changed everything. Jake, I think we need to involve federal authorities, he said. What Richardson is doing isn't just civil fraud, it's organized criminal activity that crosses state lines. Bill had discovered that Richardson's operation extended beyond Texas. He'd found similar schemes in Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana, all involving the same pattern of fake legal documents and fraudulent surveys. This is a criminal enterprise, Bill explained. They're using mail fraud, wire fraud, and racketeering to steal private property. That makes it a federal case. We contacted the FBI's white-collar crime division and presented our evidence. Agent Sarah Martinez reviewed our documentation and interviewed Tom Bradley, Martha Rodriguez, and 3 other victims who had come forward. Mr. Morrison, Agent Martinez told me after her initial investigation, what you've uncovered appears to be a multi-state property fraud scheme. We're opening a formal investigation. The FBI's involvement changed the entire dynamic of our situation. Suddenly, Richardson and the HOA were facing potential federal criminal charges instead of just civil lawsuits. Construction on my ranch stopped the day after the FBI served search warrants on Richardson's offices. Federal agents seized computers, financial records, and boxes of fraudulent documents. Richardson was arrested 2 weeks later on charges of mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, and operating a criminal enterprise. 6 other people connected to the scheme were also arrested, including 2 lawyers and a county official who had been taking bribes to approve fake permits. Once the criminal investigation became public, the Sunset Hills HOA fell apart completely. Homeowners discovered that their HOA fees had been used to fund Richardson's criminal activities, and that their community association was potentially liable for millions of dollars in damages to property owners who had been defrauded. Emergency meetings were held, lawyers were fired, and the entire HOA board resigned in disgrace. The homeowners association filed for bankruptcy, and individual residents started suing each other over who was responsible for the mess. My ranch became ground zero for the largest property fraud investigation in Texas history. FBI agents interviewed me multiple times, and I had to testify before a federal grand jury about Richardson's scheme. The road construction had been halted, but I was left with 5 acres of torn-up pasture land and a half-built road running through my property. The legal process for restoring my land and getting compensation was going to take months, if not years. But something unexpected happened while I was dealing with the legal aftermath. The media attention had made me a symbol of property rights resistance, and people started reaching out with opportunities I'd never considered. 3 months after Richardson's arrest, I got a call from a documentary filmmaker who wanted to tell the story of the HOA land grab scheme. The film, titled Stolen Ground, The HOA Wars, premiered at the South by Southwest Festival and won awards for investigative journalism. More importantly, the documentary led to speaking engagements at property rights conferences and ranching associations throughout the Southwest. I found myself traveling around Texas and neighboring states, talking to groups about how to recognize and fight property fraud schemes. The speaking fees were good, but the real benefit was meeting other ranchers and property owners who were facing similar challenges. I started consulting with property owners who were dealing with HOA overreach, helping them understand their rights and connect with lawyers who specialized in property law. Within a year, I had inadvertently created a second career as a property rights advocate and consultant. The ranch was still my primary business, but the consulting work was bringing in enough additional income to expand my operation and buy additional land. The irony wasn't lost on me. Richardson's attempt to steal my land had resulted in me becoming financially successful enough to buy more land than he'd ever tried to take. Richardson's trial began 18 months after his arrest and lasted 3 weeks. I testified about what had happened on my ranch, and Tom Bradley provided detailed evidence about the fraudulent surveying operation. The prosecution presented evidence of over 200 fraudulent property transactions involving dozens of HOAs across 4 states. The total amount of property theft was estimated at over $50 million. Richardson's defense team argued that he was simply an aggressive businessman who had made some mistakes in interpreting complex property laws. They claimed that his actions were civil matters, not criminal fraud. The jury didn't buy it. Richardson was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. His co-conspirators received sentences ranging from 3 to 8 years. More importantly for me, the court ordered full restitution to all victims. Richardson's assets were seized and liquidated, and I received $200,000 in compensation for the damage to my property and legal expenses. The money was nice, but the real victory was knowing that Richardson and his crew wouldn't be stealing anyone else's land. It took 6 months and $75,000 to restore my ranch to its original condition. The construction company that had built the illegal road was required to remove all the pavement and infrastructure at their own expense, and then reseed the damaged pasture land. By the spring following Richardson's conviction, you couldn't tell that there had ever been construction on my property. The grass was growing back thick and green, my cattle were grazing peacefully, and life had returned to normal. But I had learned some important lessons from the experience. First, property rights are only as strong as your willingness to defend them. If I had accepted the HOA's initial claims and tried to negotiate rather than fight, I would have lost my land and Richardson would have continued stealing from other people. Second, criminal schemes often rely on victims being too intimidated or too poor to fight back. Richardson's operation worked because most people couldn't afford to hire lawyers and fight lengthy court battles. Third, public attention is one of the most powerful weapons against corruption. The media coverage and social media campaign had forced authorities to take action and brought other victims forward with evidence. Finally, sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can become the best thing that ever happened. Richardson's attack on my ranch had led to a new career, financial success, and the satisfaction of helping other people protect their property rights. 5 years later, my story is still being used as a case study in property law classes and law enforcement training programs. The FBI has adopted some of the investigative techniques that were developed during Richardson's case to identify similar fraud schemes. Several states have passed laws making it easier for property owners to fight fraudulent easement claims and HOA overreach. Texas created a special prosecutor position dedicated to investigating property fraud, and similar positions have been established in other states. My consulting business has grown to include a team of lawyers, investigators, and property rights experts who help people across the country fight various forms of land theft and property fraud. The Double M Ranch is more successful than ever, with 300 head of cattle and enough land to support hunting leases and agritourism activities. But the most satisfying part of my business is the consulting work, helping other people fight back against the kind of criminals who tried to steal my land. I still get calls from property owners who are dealing with suspicious HOA demands or questionable easement claims. Most of the time, a few phone calls and some basic legal research can resolve the situation without litigation. But occasionally we uncover operations similar to Richardson's scheme, and then the real work begins. Last month, I received a letter from David Richardson, who is currently serving his sentence at a federal prison in Oklahoma. He wanted to apologize for what he had done and express his remorse for the damage he had caused to property owners throughout the Southwest. The letter seemed sincere, but I couldn't help thinking about all the people who had lost their land because they couldn't afford to fight his scheme. How many ranchers had been forced to sell their property? How many families had lost their homes because of fraudulent HOA claims? I wrote back and told Richardson that his apology was appreciated, but that the real test of his remorse would be his willingness to help authorities identify other victims and recover stolen property. To his credit, Richardson has been cooperating with ongoing investigations and has helped the FBI recover over $10 million in assets that were stolen from property owners. It doesn't undo the damage he caused, but it's better than nothing. The Sunset Hills subdivision, meanwhile, has become a cautionary tale about HOA corruption. Property values in the development dropped by 40% after Richardson's arrest, and many residents have moved away rather than deal with the ongoing legal complications. The subdivision's common areas have been sold to pay legal settlements, and the remaining residents are dealing with a fractured community association that can barely afford basic maintenance. It's a fitting end for a community that was built on stolen land and fraudulent schemes. Looking back on the whole experience, I realized that Richardson made one crucial mistake. He picked on someone who had the resources and determination to fight back. His scheme worked for years because he targeted people who couldn't afford lawyers or lengthy court battles. But every criminal eventually gets greedy and makes a mistake. In Richardson's case, his mistake was assuming that a rancher would be too simple or too poor to understand what was happening and fight back effectively. He was wrong on both counts. The real lesson from this story isn't about property law or criminal investigations. It's about the importance of standing up for what's right, even when the odds seem impossible and the enemy seems too powerful to defeat. Richardson and his crew were professional criminals with expensive lawyers and sophisticated schemes. But they were also bullies who counted on their victims being too afraid to fight back. When someone finally did fight back, with the help of good lawyers, federal investigators, and a lot of public attention, their entire operation fell apart like a house of cards. If you're dealing with suspicious HOA demands, questionable easement claims, or any other threats to your property rights, remember this: criminals count on your silence and your fear. Don't give them either. Document everything, hire good lawyers, tell your story publicly, and never give up. Property rights are fundamental to our freedom and they're worth fighting for. And if anyone tries to build a road through your ranch without permission, lock the gate, call the FBI, and get ready for the fight of your life. Because sometimes the best defense is a good offense, and sometimes the best revenge is making sure the criminals never steal from anyone else ever again. Have you ever dealt with HOA overreach or property fraud? Drop a comment below and share your story. Let's make sure these criminals know that property owners are watching and ready to fight back.